Hello, my name is Mark Huntington, and the purpose of this presentation today is to talk about how to choose a university abroad. So essentially what we're trying to do is to encourage you as a student in the United Kingdom to be a little bit more adventurous in your choices of university and perhaps consider going to study somewhere else. Now, the vast majority of what I'm going to talk about today will focus on the practical elements of that, making sure you choose the right university, what kind of things you need to bear in mind if you're going to do this. But before I get stuck into that, I suppose I should just briefly focus on why it is we think it's a really good idea. Because, of course, you have to have the desire to want to do this. Now, we would encourage you to do it because, well, students who go abroad do tend to enjoy it. They like it. As Karen here says, I was the shyest, least confident girl ever, and I've grown so much and become someone I really do not feel like I would have if I'd stayed in England and gone to university there. So she looked at it as quite a transformational experience, an opportunity to come out of her shell, reinvent herself, perhaps you might say. Adine looks at this from a slightly different perspective. She's talking less in terms of her own personal experience and more in terms of the environment in which she found herself. By which I mean the fact that there are so many students from all around the world in her classes, all sorts of different cultures from her to learn from, and a great way for her to just get a better sense of what's out there in terms of different people, different cultures, and how to get on with them most importantly. And this issue of how to get on with different people is hugely important, not just on a personal level, but also increasingly on a professional level. Employers recommend international experience. Now, this is largely because they want people who have a greater sense of cultural intelligence, an ability to understand that people might be different, and a thirst to learn from people who are different. Google say, for example, when they're looking to hire people, they're not going to ask you necessarily where you went to university, nor what it is you studied when you were there, but they are going to want to see that you have this. They say that the best students have one thing in common. They love learning with, and more importantly, from each other. At Google, we refer to this new type of talent as having cultural intelligence, this ability to understand other people. And if you never leave the country, if you never take yourself outside of your comfort zone, you might never ever realize that this is actually an issue. So Google and a lot of similar multinational organizations would far rather take a chance on people who understand this because, of course, that is the working environment you're going to end up in anyway. So that hopefully gives you a bit of a sense as to why it is we would encourage you to think about going to a university abroad, at least consider getting some kind of international experience. What I'd like to do now is focus on the decision-making process itself, because it's not as simple as saying, going to a university here is bad and going to a university abroad is better. I'm not making that point at all. What I am saying is that it's worth a while having a look to see if there might be something that's better suited to you somewhere else. And how would you go about that process? Well, in some ways, I'm going to say it's exactly the same as choosing a university here. In other ways, it's quite clearly different. But let's start with the stuff which is quite similar. And usually the single best piece of advice you will get when it comes to choosing a university anywhere is this. Make sure it's right for the particular subject that you want to study. It's all well and good knowing which universities are top of which league table or whatever, but unless it teaches what you're interested in, that kind of information is irrelevant. So don't just be choosing a university because you've heard of it or because it's local or because all your friends are going there. It has to be right for what it is you want to study. And this is where the first obstacle to studying abroad comes in, because you are not going to find everything everywhere, certainly not taught in English, let's put it that way. Within Europe, there is a growing range of courses taught in English, but it's not uniform. You will find a lot more places in the Netherlands, for example, than you ever will in France or Italy or something like that. Certain subjects are also a lot easier to find than others because certain subjects, if you like, well, lend themselves to international education better than others. So if you go onto our A-Star Future website, and you can see here, and you search for whatever it is you are interested in, if you're searching for something like business, you are going to find loads and loads of examples of places that you could go. And this is quite simply because, as Archie puts it here, it makes sense to do it in another country. Business is one of those subjects that involves trading across borders, working with people from all sorts of different backgrounds, And an education in business that doesn't include international experience, that doesn't include learning a language these days, is quite possibly, well, shall we say, suboptimal. And that's why you can find quite so many places to go and study business, from Milan to the Netherlands to Prague College in the Czech Republic, which is actually where Archie from the previous slide is currently studying. So subjects like business and also increasingly engineering, computing science, things like that, really quite easy to find abroad. Some subjects, though, although they are hugely popular here in this country, not so easy to find abroad. I mean, an example here might be something like psychology. Yes, lots of people want to study that here in the UK, and yeah, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of options for doing so. But if you start looking elsewhere in Europe, maybe there are 10, 15 places you could go. I mean, luckily, they're all very, very good choices. I don't think you could make a bad choice, but there isn't lots of them, let's put it that way. About 7 or 8 are in the Netherlands, including the University of Groningen. And then there are increasing examples in Italy, in Milan, and 1 or 2 in Spain, including Universidad Europea that we've put up here on this slide as well. Now, the one at UE in Spain is an interesting option for those of you thinking about going into counselling, because it includes a large amount of clinical practice within the actual degree itself, something that isn't typical here in this country. You are going to have to learn Spanish to do that, but if that's what you're interested in, I think that's a pretty good reason for making the effort. But then there are some other choices of subjects that see people study abroad for all sorts of different reasons. Maybe it's not your first choice to go and study abroad. Maybe you're going to have to do this because, well, the UK is not going to provide you with the opportunity to do so. It's possible that you won't get into a university here in this country. Now, to be fair, this is quite rare, but it does happen quite a lot in medicine, veterinary medicine, and dentistry. And particularly this year, for those looking for university admission in 2021, I would say it's going to happen a lot more than usual, because the number of people who are reapplying from last year who didn't get in, that's already 50% higher than it was the previous year. So getting in, going to be tough in 2021, probably also 2022. Now, if you find yourself without a place in the UK, have a look at what your options abroad might be. You have quite a number of them these days, but I do have to warn you, not all of them are as simple as getting in, paying your money, and taking up your place. You have to make sure that you're going somewhere that's going to be recognized back here in the UK, and you have to make sure that you're going to be studying somewhere where your chance of progression throughout the degree is pretty good. Now, that is why we restrict ourselves to working with medical schools in certain countries like Italy and Croatia, veterinary also in Croatia, and dentistry in Spain has proven to be very popular and also a very transparent route into the profession for British students for a number of years now. So if you find yourself in a situation where you are without offers in the UK for these subjects, the best advice I can give to you is talk to us, send us an email, go on our website, read all sorts of advice that's there before you do anything. Now, so far I've talked about going to or choosing a university abroad as if it were entirely a matter of the subject you wish to study when you get there. Sometimes that's actually not the best advice, because sometimes you're not going to go to university to study one thing. You are going to go there instead to study, well, a whole bunch of different things. Now, what I'm describing to you right now is an educational model that's more often referred to as the liberal arts and sciences, but I'm going to call it something slightly different today. I'm going to call it instead the United States of America. This is basically how higher education in the USA works. Not always, but most of the time. Here in this country, you'll be very used to the idea that all the way through school, you've been doing fewer and fewer subjects, most likely. So you might have started out with 9, 10, 11 GCSEs, 3, possibly 4 A levels. And when you go to a university, you'll be expecting to study 1, maybe 2 things when you get there. If you were to make that same transition from high school here to an American university, almost the opposite is going to happen. In your first year there, in fact, in your first 2 years, really, bearing in mind most American degrees are 4 years, you are going to be studying not 1 or 2 things, but more likely 6, 8, something like that. And it will be in a wide range of subjects. You will be studying maths, languages, arts, sciences. Not necessarily to the highest level, but they will want you to do a bit of everything, primarily because they want you to get breadth in your education rather than depth. This is how American bachelor's degrees work. They want you to explore all sorts of different areas of knowledge. They want you potentially to be opened up to new things, maybe change your mind about what it is you want to do after you get to university. That's a lot easier to do in the US than it is here in this country. So if you are the kind of person who's got a one-track mind about what it is they want to do at university, I would suggest that maybe going to an American university for your bachelor's degree is not as much of a smart move as maybe waiting and going there to do a master's degree. If, on the other hand, you're the kind of person who likes a wide range of subjects and interdisciplinary studies are becoming more popular here in the UK as well, then this could be or should be perhaps something you consider. Now, if you like the style of the US system, but you are concerned about, I don't know, cost, distance, things like that, you can find that style of education slightly closer to home. Most notably now, places like the American University of Paris, obviously, that's in Paris, a lot closer, not a lot cheaper, I have to say. University College Groningen in the Netherlands is one of about 8 or 9 liberal arts colleges in the Netherlands where you can actually get that style of education at a fraction of the cost of going to study in the USA. Now, for those of you who are still, in spite of all that, definitely committed to going to the United States, what I'd suggest is perhaps you think about trying before you buy. Maybe go there for a gap year, do a shorter period of time studying there before signing up to a full 4-year degree. But anyway, so far I've spoken about choosing a university if it's based on the subject that you wish to study, and as if that were the only thing that matters. And while I would say it's the most important thing, realistically, you're probably going to come up with a short list of places that are suitable for you rather than one place that stands out head and shoulders above everywhere else. So now your mission is really to choose between various universities. Now, how do you go about doing this? How do you measure universities against each other? Well, I suppose the most obvious answer to that question is one that I don't necessarily like too much, but I am going to address it: rankings. Here in this country, when you're trying to choose a university, you're going to be, at least a little bit interested, I would suggest, at having a look at how they rank against other universities. And obviously, everybody wants to go to the best university they possibly can. Now, how you define what's the best university? Well, I would argue rankings aren't really necessarily a great way of doing that. Now, when you start looking at universities around the world, I suppose the question to ask is, what do the rankings say? And the thing is, they're all a bit different from what you will get here. They are structured differently. And in some countries, they don't have rankings like you would expect to find here in this country. But you will be able to find global rankings, the ones that compare universities all around the world. And these will give you an indication of which are the most, respected universities, if you like, around the world. But they will only give you a partial picture. And I would argue they don't give you the part of the picture you need the most. They will tell you all about the quality of a university's research. They'll tell you all about the reputation of a university amongst its peers. But what they won't tell you about is anything to do with staff-student ratios, job prospects after you graduate, how happy their students are while they are there. And that's quite simply because they don't really measure these things. So by their own admission, these rankings are not necessarily the most appropriate tool for choosing where to go and be a bachelor's degree or a bachelor's student. But if that were the only problem with the rankings, I would say, fine, use them, just be careful. There is actually a bigger one. And that is that sometimes they might actually dissuade you from making the right choice. They could actually lead you away from a place that's really, really right for you. Now, to give you an example of what I mean by this, I want to focus for a moment on an Italian university up on this slide, Università Bocconi. Now, if you go into Google and you search for the best universities in the world, you are not going to find Bocconi. If, on the other hand, you go into Google and you search for the best universities in the world for studying economics, they are going to show up pretty near the top of the list. Now, the reason for that is because they're a relatively small, not tiny, they have 10,000 odd students, but they're a relatively small university, but they're very narrowly focused, only in economics, social sciences, and law. So this means they will never, ever get to the top of the general league tables where they're competing with universities that have medical schools or engineering faculties and so on. So, you need to look for what's good in your particular field, your choice of subject. Now, I do appreciate I just there gave you 2 contradictory stories about Bocconi, if you like. Why should you believe me? Well, luckily, there is another tool up my sleeve that I can give you to show that Bocconi might be the right choice for you. And this is a tool that you can use on any university that you might be interested in, but I'm specifically going to use them as an example. When you come up against a university that you've never heard of before, and you're trying to get a rough and ready measure of their quality, have a look at who they work with. All universities have partnerships with others. These partnerships exist so that you can go on exchange, so that they can collaborate on research projects. And Bocconi has, well, hundreds of partners all around the world, but I've put up 4 of the international ones here on this slide. Princeton University in the USA, maybe you're already familiar with it. It's an Ivy League university after all. Sciences Po in France, one of the very best French grande école, the one that specializes in the social sciences. University of Sydney and NUS in Singapore, also very, very good world-class universities. So if we see a bunch of universities that they partner with that you know and understand perhaps a little bit better, that might give you some kind of insight as to whether a university is good or not. Now, I'm not saying that's foolproof, but I do think it provides a level of context that maybe rankings just don't. But perhaps more importantly anyway than what rankings say, you've got to bear in mind you are choosing somewhere to spend 3 or 4 years of your life. And this can be, or this should be, a really personal decision as to what is the right place for you. Now, what's the best way to work out if a university is likely to be the best place for you? Well, in an ordinary year, I would definitely say open days. Obviously, not so much as things stand right now. But yeah, going to stand on a university's campus, having a look around, and while you were there, asking yourself the question as to whether or not you feel you could be happy there, whether or not you feel you could be successful there, this is an important part of choosing a university. But I am going to sound a word of caution about open days, because obviously these are opportunities that universities take to present themselves to you from their best side. So everybody you meet is going to be smiley. Everybody you meet is going to be telling you what a wonderful decision it was to go and study there. And that's all nice to know, but yeah, ultimately meaningless. You need to think about this for what's right for you. Occasionally, you also need to see past what I can describe as some other irrelevant factors that might cloud your judgment. To give you an example from one of the universities we work with in Spain, I've already mentioned Universidad Europea. It's on the outskirts of Madrid, and it's beautiful. You go and stand there on their campus, you can see it there at the top of this slide. They look beautiful. You will be incredibly impressed. So impressed, in fact, were Netflix when they visited it, that they decided to host one of their Spanish language series, Elite, on UEM's campus. Now, in countries where Elite is popular, and you can get it on Netflix here in the UK, it is obviously in Spanish. Go and have a look if you want to see what UEM looks like. But in countries where Elite is really popular, UEM get loads of inquiries. And sometimes those inquiries are literally as shallow as, I want to go where my favorite TV show was made. So yeah, not great. Now, at the bottom of this slide, I've put something else that's got nothing to do with open days and everything to do with the situation we find ourselves in right now: web classes. Because I appreciate you're not likely to get to universities that often between now and choosing one. So a lot of the research you're going to have to do is going to be online using, of course, the internet. And some of the information you're going to get is going to be, well, shall I say, dubious. But other parts of what you can find can be incredibly enlightening. And I actually think web classes are one of the best things of all for trying to get a sense of what it's like to be at a university abroad, particularly in an age where you're likely to be taking blended learning or online classes as part of your education, no matter what comes next, because this is literally the opportunity for you to do just that today. Now, the university that I put up on this slide to illustrate this point is the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. They teach the widest range of bachelor's degrees in English right now in the whole of Europe, probably something like 36 different degrees. And for many of them, you can go online and take a web class. Now, these are actually structured programs where you're actually interacting with staff. You're taking lessons for a 4-week period. So they don't just happen all the time, and they don't just happen with thousands upon thousands of people signing up. You will have real interaction with potentially your future professors. Now, they do these twice a year in November. There is one session just starting right now in November 2020, and there'll be another one in March, April 2021. But I think these are fantastic opportunities for experiencing what it's like to be at a university in the Netherlands, and they've proven to be very, very popular indeed with British students the last few times they've done them. So now moving away from the side of choosing a university abroad that's more or less the same as choosing a university here. Yes, you need to make sure it teaches the right subject. Yes, you need to make sure it's a good quality and you're going to be happy there. But once you've established all of those factors, there are still some other considerations that you will have that are frankly going to make studying abroad, well, shall we say, different to studying here. And I'd just like to close by looking at some of these in a little bit of detail. Now, this first one is obviously something which, 12 months ago, we weren't even talking about at all, COVID-19. What is this doing to universities? Well, obviously, those students who started university this year are having a very, very different experience from those last year. And for those of you looking to start in 2021 or 2022, it's going to be different again. It's extremely unlikely that things will be exactly as they are right now, at least I hope not. And it's also quite unlikely that they will go back to the way things were in 2019. Things are going to change as far as higher education is concerned, meaning that the advice you get about what the university experience is all about from people who went there even 3-4 years ago might not be directly relevant to you. So there are a lot of other considerations that you will have. On this slide, I put up the 3 that I think are the most important. Safety, how will your university look after you? Learning, how are they going to teach you? Is it going to be class-based, blended, online? And experience, what can they offer you by way of student experience and social life in an era of social distancing? Now, I think we have to accept that universities are as much a hostage to what happens next as anybody else is. So nobody can really give you guaranteed answers here. But what I would encourage you to do is look at the way they are responding to the situation as it is right now, see whether you regard that as being sensible, and factor that in to your decision making when trying to choose where to go. The next thing that we need to bear in mind is something which is not going to go away. This is the same forever. You need to make sure that your degree is worth the paper it's written on. There is absolutely no point going abroad and coming back with a degree that is not recognized in the UK. Now, ordinarily, this is no problem whatsoever. All degrees within the European higher education area, and that's not the EU, it's something broader than that, and it's something we are not leaving, are notionally equal, which means for many subjects, you've got no issues whatsoever. The likely problems you will have in this field are when you're looking to study in a profession. Things like, well, obviously, law. You go and study law abroad, isn't going to be English law, is it? It's going to be different. That's going to involve a different educational pathway. It might be a very good one, but it's going to be different. Subjects like medicine and dentistry, studying those elsewhere in the European Union right now means your recognition back in the UK should be automatic. Studying them anywhere else, you are definitely going to have to take additional exams once you come home. Entry requirements. What grades and subjects do you need to get in? Well, these are different, but generally speaking, a little bit easier than here in the UK. I mean, obviously, some super selective universities around the world are going to be very, very tough to get into. But that you will find, in general, universities abroad might be slightly easier than here. Sometimes literally all you need to do is just pass your A-levels and that's it, you're in. BTEC's not always as widely recognized as A-levels around the world, but yeah, places you can go in some countries for sure. The one thing I will say about entry requirements, and the reason why I haven't brought them up until now, is that they are a useless tool for judging quality. Now, I know you do this here in the UK. A university that's asking for 3 A's is clearly better than one that's asking for 3 B's. No, it isn't. Not when you're looking at universities abroad. Don't fall into the trap of thinking, well, this university's got really low entry requirements. It must be rubbish. It must be easy, or indeed the opposite. You cannot make that comparison. So be careful with this. Sometimes, well, generally speaking, A-levels are pretty good for getting into universities abroad, but occasionally you might find you might need an additional subject. Sometimes some countries ask for 4 A-levels, like Germany, Switzerland, and so on, Sweden, and I think as well. But also some countries might insist on maths A-level, for example, even for completely unrelated programs. So do have a look at the entry requirements early, and do make sure that you are, realistically going to stand a chance of getting in. How do you go about applying? Well, all I'm going to say about this is, well, how you don't go about applying. You don't apply through UCAS. So everything you learn about the UCAS system is not directly transferable to applying to universities abroad. although in some countries they do have systems which look and feel a bit like UCAS, but actually trying to compare them leads you into problems. So I wouldn't even try and do that. Just take each system around the world on face value. And a common application I put up on this slide, that's something that you will probably come across if you look at US universities. StudyLink you will definitely come across if you look at Dutch universities, but these things are completely separate from UCAS, which leads me on to the best news of all, which is that you can apply both here and abroad at the same time. Nothing to stop you from doing both. And that means you're no longer restricted to your 4 or 5 choices through UCAS. You could, if you really felt the need, have hundreds. Now, obviously, applying to hundreds of universities is a complete waste of a lot of people's time, not just your own. So I don't recommend that. But having a couple of options abroad in addition to British ones, or having a couple of British ones in addition to your options abroad, probably a smart idea. It's not going to cost you very much to apply both here and abroad. Usually you apply abroad a bit later than you do here in this country, although that is shifting ever earlier in some of the most attractive countries. And sometimes you actually apply directly to the university you're interested in as well. So it's not always through a UCAS type system. But a big thing that's different when you start looking at universities abroad is money. And a big way that it's different is something that I haven't really mentioned too much on this slide, other than to say that the student loans you get here in the UK don't travel with you if you do your full degree abroad. Therefore, you're going to be on your own financially. Now, does that mean it's going to be cheaper or more expensive? Well, actually, who knows? Because who knows how much of your loans here you will ever repay. But one thing I can say for sure is that tuition fees are lower in other countries than they are here. Unfortunately, however, they might not be that much lower for that much longer. This is the one part of our presentation where Brexit is really going to have a very, very big impact in many countries. Not all, some places it will make no difference whatsoever. But in countries that are popular with British students like the Netherlands, Brexit means that you might be paying higher fees from 2021 than you would have done in 2020 if you have a British passport. I mean, if you have an Irish passport or any other EU passport, you've got absolutely nothing to worry about. But if you are British, unfortunately, even recording this a month and a half before the end of transition, we still don't really know what's coming next. But there is some information on our blog as to what we expect to see. And I have to say, it's not brilliant news. But even in the worst case scenario, I could still make the case comfortably that in many cases, going to study at a Dutch university, for example, would work out cheaper than studying at one here. Certainly it would in Germany, Belgium, and a few other places, even post-Brexit. Now, I hate concluding on money. I don't think it's a particularly valid reason for choosing one university over another, but I do fully accept that it is a limiting factor, let's put it that way. But first and foremost, please do go back to what I said earlier about choosing a university for what I can describe as the right reasons. How can we help you with that? Well, obviously, we're not with you in a school setting today to answer any questions that you might have in person, but you're more than welcome to email me, contact us on Twitter, go through our websites and fill out one of our need help forms, and we will get back to you if we can possibly answer your question. On this slide, you can see the links that will take you to our various websites. Please do go and have a look at those, make a note of these, and hopefully we can help you start in your journey towards choosing a university abroad. Thank you very much for your attention.